Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DEO Growth Secrets. I'm your fearless host, Emmet Scott, and today I'm just excited to have Eric Scalzo and David Marks, both attorneys with Holland Knight. And you think attorneys, but these are attorneys helping with acquisitions on the M&A side, helping private equity firms find good opportunities, helping dentists find good opportunities by doing the work that goes behind the scenes to make sure everybody's getting a fair deal. So I'm excited to have both of them on because you guys have an inside look into what's really happening in the industry. And it's not a place that, as dentists or even operators, we really get to be in those rooms and hear what's happening. So I'm excited to and appreciate both of you all being on today to kind of give us a feel. And I just want to jump right into it. Either one of you can start, maybe introduce yourself as you answer some of these. But I'm curious what you're seeing, what's trending right now in the industry, what's maybe a little different than it was 2 years ago, et cetera.
David, why don't you start?
Sure. My name is David Marks, and thank you for the kind introduction. I think let me directly answer the question. I think what we're seeing is one of the most important time periods in the next evolution of DSOs, and it goes beyond just DSOs. I think this part is really critical to understand. What we're seeing is a lot of experimentation going on right now in dental because it is one of the most developed, sophisticated, experienced areas of creativity when it comes to deal structures, equity structures, compensation structures, all up and down the chain from a debt side all the way to equity. And a lot of really smart people, and maybe some dumb people, are spending a lot of time in the area realizing that this is a crucible of opportunity where they can take lessons learned all the way back from the 90s when a lot of these were public companies, but really to the current time period to address what is, I would argue, is one of the most important driving forces in healthcare services right now. And that is the background of the money, and it specifically LPs who are looking for both deploy billions of dollars of what we call dry powder. And so they're hungry for investment opportunities, and specifically in healthcare services. And on the other hand, there's a lot of these older platforms that have yet to trade hands again. And so they're also looking for a return of capital. And you'll sometimes see this in the media talked about as liquidity crisis or liquidity challenges within private equity world. That background is creating a lot of interesting opportunities because the fundraising that's happening for these private equity funds is affecting the deal terms that everyone from private credit down to your traditional buyout firms want, and how they evaluate DSO opportunities if they're going to provide money. And in turn, that affects all the way down the chain to the smallest startups. We're seeing all kinds of really interesting developments, VC, technology-enabled firms, all kinds of people coming to the table and realizing dental is one of the most exciting areas to really be able to try out and experiment with new creative structures.
David, a couple things you hit on there I think are important for our listeners. Sometimes it's like, why do I care what's going on with some big firm or big DSO? I'm a single practice, et cetera. But the domino effect that has on them someday selling their practice and what that's worth and the structure is real. I always say YouTube doesn't get $1 billion unless there's a Google, right? And so if there are competing interests really trying to maximize the value of the dental practices, everybody wins off of that. Even if you never decided to sell to a DSO, it just sets a new benchmark. And so any of these things that aren't happening can also have a downstream effect on a dental practice. I'm curious if we just said, all right, there's a few things, you mentioned the 90s, we could even take it to early 2000s, et cetera. And some of whether it's lesson learned or things that have changed that are forcing some of the more thinking, thoughtfulness around some of these deal structures. I mean, the obvious one as a layperson is we know interest rates have gone up from, being almost 0 to 3%, to being higher than that. And so if people borrow money more expensively, that's going to change what they can and can't do. We know labor costs have gone up dramatically, which for any dental practice that's taking PPO insurance, which is the majority, has squeezed margins and forced dental groups to get more creative using technology and kind of get their margins back. Are there other things you can say that have happened that are, affecting how deal structures are being made right now?
Absolutely. I think the other thing, in addition to those kind of really impactful uh, facets of deals, is the kind of landscape, the overarching landscape, and what we're calling the kind of baby HSRs or state review and approval laws, which are rolling out across the country.
Mm.
And our colleague John Saran in our Chicago office has been tracking this, and we have on our website. It's called the HK Navigator, a visual map of the United States and all the states that are exploring, have proposed, or have passed legislation relating to transaction reporting and even some consent laws where transactions in the healthcare space need to be put in front of um, uh, regulators to either
This is
just
a place
announce.
where regulators have concerns around the consolidation in different healthcare. It's not just a dental thing.
Correct.
They want to
And
understand and see what's going on.
and in some cases, dental's actually carved out and or left out, and in some cases, it's explicitly carved in, and it's an evolving arena. Um, and I think there's some folks out there kind of running around screaming, the sky is falling, and this is a problem, and this is an issue, and et cetera, et cetera. But as David said, the DSO space is one of the most mature physician practice management spaces out there because of the history of um, the evolution of the industry and also the players, DEO and ADSO and others who have really kind of linked arms together and said, here's how we achieve regulatory compliance, which is good for everybody and can still make money. And this is, I think, just another opportunity to show as an industry that compliance is forefront in our mind. And so knowing that transactions may need to be reported or consent needs to be given in advance of a transaction is really important to make sure that we're all complying with it. And I don't see it as problematic as opposed to just one more thing that we need to comply with, and it's now the lay of the land. Again, the lay of the land is changing on a weekly, daily basis, and so check that Navigator website often.
Yeah,
Uh,
is that a website that someone could go to kind of understand their state? And
Absolutely, and we can
yeah,
we can provide a link for you guys for the show notes
yeah.
or wherever else you put them. But
I think it's really interesting because I think, a practicing dentist somewhere never imagined that, someday they'd go to sell their practice and like it might have to be approved. And so that might be something that they want to get involved with one way or the other. But yeah, that's how big and maturing this industry is, and healthcare generally
that's right.
is, right?
That's right.
Um, I'm curious if you think about if we go really deep quickly here on deal structure, what are you noticing as evolving as, private equity firms are maturing and understanding the nuances? I think there's a lot of concern by dentists in the past, especially that private equity firms were coming in, buying up dental practices and kind of controlling the marketplace. Being an insider, if you will, I've helped a lot of our members understand it's not true. What's more true is you have dentist entrepreneurs looking for funding, looking to have impact in their communities and grow. And they need private equity because the banks run out or they want to take some money off the table. And so dentists have always really been in control of this marketplace. And I think to the extreme that at sometimes the private equity firms have gotten really hurt by not understanding how much in control dentists are on this. And so I think they've had to mature and say, oh, wait, compliance really matters. We need to look at that in a way maybe we didn't look at that before.
Yeah.
Um, the terms of the agreement and the dentist just walking away or the dentist not being happy. I
Yeah.
think dentists are so concerned that the private equity firm will control them, et cetera, which, legitimate things they need to make sure they watch for. But frankly, the private equity firms are concerned that all the dentists stop working, stop producing, and the owner just walks away and says, "Thanks for the money. Good luck on running this thing."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious how that's playing out on a real, detailed basis in some of these contracts and deals.
Yeah. So we, as a firm, so we're partners at Holland and Knight, and we head up the private equity healthcare um, practice with some others here. And we joined Holland and Knight, David and I, and 250 of our closest friends when Waller merged with Holland and Knight a little over 2 years ago. And so those of you in the DSO space or the dental space for a little while may know the name Waller. We've been in the DSO game for 30 plus years, and our now retired former partner, Don Moody, was really a thought leader in that. I hired Don when I was in-house counsel with a DSO down in Miami to do some work for us. And then he returned the favor, and I moved to Nashville a decade ago and have continued in the space. But drawing on those 30 years of experience and the evolution of the DSO industry, kind of living through the dentists that walk away, the dentists that get hit by the proverbial bus, right? We're all mortal, and dentists have passed away, and we've had to deal with kind of the transition of clinical care and the transition of the practice and the transition of the business deal that was struck. And we've had instances where other law firms will sue to what we call blow up the DSO, right? Take the friendly practice owners and turn them unfriendly. And so we have evolved the documents in a way to make sure that we've got carrots and sticks, and that the documents stand up against each other to achieve the business deal. But at the end of the day, you have in 45 states the requirement that the practice be owned by a licensed dentist, and the prohibition on the corporate practice of dentistry. And in those states, you will always have that kind of push and pull of the investors and their desired outcome from an economic standpoint, and the clinicians and their desired and frankly rightful retention of clinical control of the practice. And even in the states where direct ownership is permitted, obviously the clinical decisions have to be made by the licensed dentists. But I think we've seen the industry really kind of come to an alignment on that front, a realization that great clinical outcomes, as dictated by and supported by the practitioners, lead to great business outcomes. And so we're seeing a shift to, and it's been a decade in the making, where so there's been some real leaders that started this really, really early, but a shift from we are an accumulator of practices and our value is strictly in getting more practices and kind of duct taping them together, to we are an enabler of great clinicians. We take the back office work. We take the stuff they don't want to worry about. We bring the expertise from other industries, right? Other multi-site retail style industries. And we've seen some great success with some executives that have been brought in from the hotel industry and from the, kind of the restaurant industry, because those concepts of multi-site organizational, how do you run a business like that? Those concepts are really transferable to the DSO space, to provide a space
with high level of customer service, right? I mean,
exactly.
right?
And
That's
a
what we're
focus,
getting to. Yeah.
and a focus on the customers. And the customers is really two customers, if you think about it. The customers are the patients of the dental practices. And obviously you need more patients showing up so that dentists can spin the drill and treat more folks. But the dentists are also customers of the DSO, right? And if you have, even if you've structured the most kind of tightly wound Gordian knot contract saying the DSO and the practice entity are tied forever, which you can debate whether or not that's even permitted, but let's pretend that it is, and let's pretend that it's tied super tightly. To your point, if the dentist doesn't want to show up anymore, the dentist doesn't have to show up anymore. And so it's evolved to, how do we create a place where we can support each dentist to make sure that they thrive in their chosen profession, so that everybody is a winner at the end of the day, patients and dentists and investors.
Yeah, it's interesting. One shift I've seen, I'm curious your all's take on this, is, let's say early on, you might have a private equity friend that says, "Hey, you're a dentist. Have you thought about getting with some buddies and let's, put some practices together and grow this, and we could get some arbitrage on multiple, et cetera." And a dentist goes, "Oh, that's a cool idea, et cetera." Now you have dentists saying, "What if we got together and, we could just kind of combine together and maybe we could get a higher multiple together." And you have the private equity firm say, "No." you know,
Exactly.
like, no, that actually doesn't work. We actually need things standardized. We need clinical standard of care. We need a clinical leader. We can't just have a hodgepodge of leadership here. And so that's some of the maturing that I'm seeing just overall in the industry is they actually know what brings good clinical care, good standardization. Um, Everybody being on different practice management software is super painful. And how is the clinician going to lead if that's true? And how are they going to get the right data reports and all of those things? Am I reading that right? Are you seeing that shift as well?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and by the way, this is not just a small shift. This is a huge shift. I mean, this is, if you look back at the late 90s and the ones that failed, and if we're being honest, even some of the ones that started to struggle with the interest rate increases, the reason is they were cobbling these practices together without real integration, without real, effort to create value and provide value outside of trying to get a arbitrage on a multiple. With the interest rate changes, that math doesn't math anymore. And the only thing that counts is real, genuine good business, where people wake up in the morning, they want to go to work, they're excited to go to work, and the patients they see, they come back and they tell their spouse, "Hey, I actually like to go into the dentist." I mean,
Mhm.
it's the kind of mentality that is an extraordinary differentiator. We're seeing it in terms of valuations by private equity. And the good thing is that while not all private equity shops are equal, I think even at the fundraising side, right now is not an easy fundraising environment for private equity shops. The ones that are really powerfully able to differentiate, specifically, they hire experts to serve all of their portfolio companies around payer reimbursement, around AI, around technology-enabled services, around practice management software integration, right? There's a real understanding that it's no longer just about how good you are at manipulating the Excel spreadsheet. It's how good are you at helping people really manifest the best version of themselves when it comes to both the giving and then actually experiencing care. That is a huge and powerful differentiator, to the point of like multiple turns of EBITDA.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, it's a maturing that is a win-win. At our last event, someone asked me about, is it about profits or culture? And I'm like, that world of them being separate is
Yeah,
gone.
yeah, totally
Um,
agree.
Profits allow you to drive culture, by the way. Like, how do you pay for someone's lunch and do the fun things, et cetera, and have the team meetings when you don't have any money? And how do you drive good profits when you have terrible culture and the turnover rate and people can go work anywhere now and all of those things? So they are hand in hand. It sounds like at the highest levels of even transactions and money and so forth, that's recognized as well. So that's great for everyone to just mature into better businesses. That aligns with our DEO coaching. So that's why I think it's important. So
I
I mean, I'll
think
tell you,
I
Elvin.
want to
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
I want to push back on one thing you said there, Emmett, because I think it's really easy to, and I know you're not advocating this, but I do want to draw the distinction. I think it's really easy to say culture is lunches, culture
right,
is
right, right. Yeah,
events.
totally agree.
I think it goes much further than that, right? Culture is building a sustainable business that doesn't rely on the arbitrage. Culture is, I think, creating an environment where compliance is king, right? Both from clinical compliance to corporate practice compliance, to up at the board level, antitrust compliance and the issues when you go to sell what's going to be looked at there. And I think, and again, I know you weren't saying lunches are culture. That's not what the DEO preaches. But I do think that the private equity folks, the investors, can sniff out we've got a great culture. We do Friday lunches and we do a team meeting every quarter in the Bahamas or whatever, right? Or every year, whatever. To the feeling of a culture of excellence.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really important because you're going to get the extra turn if you have a culture of excellence. You're going to get a, we're probably going to cut those lunches because they don't actually do anything response, if that's your culture. So
Yeah, it's a great call out. I think that's right. I think owners showing up stressed, owners showing up having to focus on short-term items, right, is a result of not having profit.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so having that profitability, but you're right, the underlying component is, do people know how to behave at a level of excellence and it's rewarded
Mhm.
behaving that way? It's a great call out.
So
David,
I'll
what
give
else
you
do you
a
want?
specific reason why I think we're seeing it in a more systematic way. If you look back 10 years ago, every single deal, all the way from the smallest deals to the biggest deals, they were more or less structured the same way in terms of you have a buyer and you have a seller. And the seller's going to make some representations and warranties, and sellers expected to stand behind those. Where if they say, "Hey, I've got this number of dollars of revenue," and it turns out they didn't, they're going to have to pay up for that. And if it turns out that they represented that they were doing things in a compliant way and they weren't, well, guess what? They'll have to pay up for that. That's still true, but a big change that's happened, and you can actually track it. We have the data for it, is the introduction of representation and warranty insurance into the healthcare market. The healthcare market was the last market where it became a thing. And the reason was because the insurance carriers were unwilling to provide coverage really around things like HIPAA, and then especially billing and coding and healthcare compliance.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting about that market is what you have are these third-party insurers who are saying, we will insure the seller's representations and warranties, the accuracy of their statements about their compliance and their financials. And if you think about it, what happens is when you're going to the process, you're doing a deal or staying up late nights, chugging Red Bull, and you come into an issue where buyer and seller just have to decide, are they willing to do the deal on these terms or not? In the old days, the buyer could just say, you know what, I'm just going to be okay with it and let it go. Now, buyer doesn't get to make that decision, really. The
Hmm.
insurance carrier does due diligence on how high quality the buyer's due diligence was in the process. So the buyer can't just use any law firm, and they can't just use any quality of earnings firm, and they can't use any billing and coding firm. They have to use high reputable folks, because there's going to be a separate law firm representing the insurance carrier and doing checks on all of it. And what we've actually seen is an evolution in the types of claims that are being brought afterwards, and a lot more real effort being put into due diligence up front. So it is kind of forced structurally an outcome that is yielding just better transactions. It's kind of harder for the sellers who would just kind of run and gun and say, you know what, we'll deal with compliance later. You can't. And so what it really does is, because that insurance is now available, you can do $30 million deal or less sometimes and still get really good coverage. And because that has an incredibly good outcome for the seller, right? Instead of tying up 10, 15%, 25% of their cash proceeds in an escrow for like 2 years, they can get pretty much all their cash at closing in those deals. But it really
That's
yields a better
that's
outcome.
amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. So the insurance carrier being in the deal now, number one, I think represents a level of quality that we're maturing into, that they feel like they can actually insure it. So, pat us on the back. We're getting better as an industry. Number two, to your point, it makes the deal so much easier. If there is an issue, you do have a third party who is financing those issues, because it was so painful, right? Where private equity firms like, hey, your numbers didn't play out right.
Right.
Now they're going to who's their partner, who's their dentist, and saying, we're going to extract all these dollars from you. And so now you have this other piece. It's nice that there's a third party in the room that just has to take care of that. But in exchange for that, that third party is going to be like, all right, we're going to vet this opportunity, which has a virtue cycle, doesn't it? It just continues
It
to
does.
bring things up to a higher and higher level. And at the end of the day, it means as an industry, we actually have to run things off of almost a standard code of ethics, if you will, that
There's
a
an
third party is vetting.
expectation, your
Yeah.
rising floor. And even if you're not doing an insured deal, if the buyer who's buying a practice down the road, if they want to be able to exit and get the really attractive benefits of an insured
Mm,
deal, they know that between that first deal and when they exit, they have to implement really rigorous structures and protocols. I mean, it's really not that different than any other set of financial controls. If you're going from a cash pay, we maybe sometimes put everything into the system and maybe sometimes we don't. We don't have great tracking on credit balances and prepaids and you know that happens with a lot of the startup practices. But at some point, if you want to really take advantage, you got to clean that up because the expectation is now there.
there's been a movement in the industry for a long time, which is multiples have held, but the requirements have increased,
Hmm.
right? So what I could get for 10 times in the past might have been a throw together versus now it has to be like a legit business. And I think this just speaks to that as well, is it an insurable business, right? Do those kind of things now are driving a turn or a multiple, et cetera, because it reduces risk along the board. Anything you want to
In
add,
in
Eric? Yeah.
in an insurable business, I mean, I said before, right, building a sustainable business. I think that they're
Mm,
kind of it's interchangeable, right?
yeah.
If it is insurable, it is sustainable if you've built in the right systems and the right checks and the right policies and the right focus and culture. I think you are both insurable and sustainable.
As you look at the evolution, if you were talking to a bunch of dentist owners like you are on this podcast, what advice could you give them? They don't do these transactions every day. Okay. So for every one of them, except for maybe our larger groups in DEO who, have done this a couple times, but the majority, they're going to start flat-footed
Mhm.
and they're going to go get advice, frankly, from their brother-in-law who's an attorney and from other friends. What are some things with you all, like this is your day job? This is the only thing you do all day long. What are some things you see that, the best dentist owners are doing in the transaction process, right? That just make it better for them, ultimately. And on the reverse side, what are kind of like not best practices, where you see like they think that that's going to help them win, or get a better deal, but it actually just kind of ruins things and might even move their number downward. So if you guys don't mind sharing a little bit of inside ball, I think that would be really helpful. Kind of best customer activities versus worst customer activities that create the best outcomes for them. And I think you've given number one, which is build a real business, build a great business, focus on that more than anything. I think that's foundationally number one. Is there a number two, three, or four?
If if you know you are going to sell or think you are going to sell or want to just build a really good business that you might have to hold forever and that's okay, you should be looking at the measurement stick for that transaction, right? Or the measurement stick for success. And so if we're talking about how do you get to a sustainable business, which is also the same thing as an insurable business,
Mm,
what would you need to do to make it an insurable transaction? And we every day will not every day, but all the time will help our clients in anticipation of a sale. We'll do a pre-sale diligence run through because we play on both sides. We buy, we sell. We help people grow, we help them sell, and we help private equity guys invest and make sure that their investment is secured. And so, the earlier that you can do a kind of pre-sale diligence, even if you don't have a plan of sailing, the earlier you know the six buckets that you are missing parts
mm,
of. And the earlier you can address it, prioritize, and then address them, right? If you don't have a good compliance program that meets the seven elements, first of all, that may be problematic depending on the amount of government money you accept, but it's also not best practices. If you didn't even know you needed to have a compliance program that meets the seven elements, fine. But the only way you're going to figure that out is if we do a kind of pre-sale, reverse diligence and make sure that you've got what you need. So I think that the folks that do it right figure out the goalpost, prioritize and work towards that goalpost. Again, even if they never want to sell, that builds a sustainable business. And then the ones that screw it up, if you will, or the thing that we see maybe that you think adds value but doesn't. I'm going to put it that way because I don't think it's a screw
yeah.
up. thinking you need to be a DSO just because you're in the DEO, thinking you need to
Mhm.
be a DSO just because like that's what your neighbor's doing, right? I can't tell you how many calls I've had with people and I say, okay, you want to be a DSO, we can do that and we can take your money and happy to do it, but why? And they say, well, because I get a higher multiple. No, you don't. Oh, because I'm part of the DEO, I need. No, you don't, right? Like unless you have a real good reason and it's estate planning purposes, that's a valid reason. It's you want to take non-dentist investors, that's a valid reason. But if you don't have a valid reason, I don't want your money. I want you to grow a great business that you can then sell. And as part of that transaction, the DSO will likely be formed and established and all that, but you don't need it in advance of that.
That's a good one, Eric, and close to my heart because I actually have a presentation and training in our resource library that I point a lot of members to when they're like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a DSO." That's titled "Why You Shouldn't Set Up a DSO."
Awesome. Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah.
seems counterintuitive, but I think they think it'll make them look better for the banks, and it won't. It'll make the banks even more confused.
Confused. Yeah, yeah.
They think that it'll make things simpler for their employee management, which it won't. It'll
Yeah.
actually make all the accounting more expensive as they're trying to do allocations
The
and
benefits
sheets
more
and so forth.
expensive, the insurance more expensive, the everything more
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah.
Unless you have a good reason, and then let's do it and figure all that out.
And you hit on the two reasons that I give as the only two reasons. I need a non-clinical investment partner in this in some form. I have to give equity to somebody who's not a non-clinician, and I've actually already maximized out a profit sharing solution, which would solve that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Or number two, maybe some estate planning concepts that would work. So I like our alignment on that. That's an awesome one. Anything else you want to add as like not great practice?
David, thoughts?
Maybe I'll call it transaction ADD. It's where you really get distracted easily by different shiny objects, and there's going to be a lot of shiny objects thrown at you in a sale transaction. Even before a sale transaction, we get a lot of phone calls talking about how do I get my associates motivated? How do I get them equity? And the analogy I give, which Eric hates, but the analogy that I give is imagine I'm Willy Wonka. I've got a big candy shop, right? I have so many different flavors and things that can make you turn into a giant balloon or, shrink you down to a little gummy bear. But if I give you all of them, you're gonna get sick. My job is to curate for you based on what your vision is, what your purpose is, and stick to that. If you don't know it, stop, figure it out. If you are unwilling to rely on tell your team what that is, stop and get them on board, get them aligned with it. It's always a little bit of a yellow flag for me when some sellers are kind of understandably, but they say, you know what, I can't let anybody else on the team, no one, know about a potential sale transaction. It's not because they have a bad business. They might have a great business. It's a little bit of maybe there's a misalignment between what that founder's goals are for the business and what everybody else's goals are in the business. And it's just, frankly, if everybody's really aligned on vision, they're going to find a partner who is aligned with that vision, right? And they're going to execute on it. Every single person is going to wake up every day. I mean, I have to wake up every morning and see Eric's face. And I'm not even married to him. I'm married to my wife, Morgan, who works just a couple doors down the hallway. So it's one of those things that you're going to perform better if you are aligned with the people that you wake up, drink coffee, and go and execute on. And if you really believe in it and staying true to those principles, it's really important. And you should have that conversation with counsel. You should have that conversation with your whole team in the sale process especially if you get a really good high quality investment banker. They need to be aligned and understand what is it that you really want to achieve, not just in terms of how much money you want to take out, right? But what do you actually want to achieve in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in terms of making a difference for yourself, for your day-to-day life, for your patients? There's a lot of things that you realize don't matter that can be distractions in a sale process, little terms around employment agreements and equity terms and various purchase agreement points. And then there's other terms that really should matter a lot, right? And so focusing on what matters is what I would say.
It speaks to the culture too around, if you're doing this transaction, some of the language our coaches will give members is like, how does it benefit them? because you probably are thinking about this transaction because you've maximized your ability to have impact, to scale and grow, which is limiting their career growth, etc. And so being able to formulate like, okay, yes, there are benefits to me in doing this transaction. There's a lot of benefits to them too. And does that align with, your ultimate vision and your culture within the company? If so, they should all be really excited about this happening, right? But if it's something kind of, I don't know, misaligned with your culture and your vision, then you probably want to call that out sooner than later. I think number two that I heard is get clear on what's your why in all of this so that all the little details you don't get too caught up on, right?
Exactly.
Because if you're really clear on like, here's the outcome that I'm trying to get to, these other things maybe just aren't as meaningful or important. So it's awesome. One thing that's really interesting about you all that I think our listeners should understand is you really have to play in the world of quality because you are on both sides of transactions. You have to look in the face the private equity firm that you helped get a deal to, and vice versa. And so if your name gets out there of like they just give us crappy stuff all the time, it really hurts your business.
Yeah.
So you guys, like the insurance companies, are sitting there going, we really need to have quality on this thing, right? We need to have quality private equity firms that all the dentists aren't going to hate because we're going to get a bad name over that. And we need to have quality dental practices that we're handing to private equity firms to partner with, or they're going to think these guys are pushing deals that are, terrible on the back end. So I think there's something really virtuous to that at the end of the day.
Lawyers and virtuous. I like
You're
that.
welcome. I'm a good
Yeah,
marketing guy, aren't I?
there's
Yeah.
yeah, not too many people have drawn that connection, but it is a real connection. No, I just wanted to say also that question shouldn't come up for the first time as part of your transaction. And I think one thing that the DEO, like a really just kind of brilliant pivot or really expansion is the expansion into the coaching game and the idea that you should be diving into your why and your what and your how years before you're talking about a transaction so that you're not coming up with an answer. Why is this good for staff? It's part of your plan and your vision from if not from day one, from day now.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what's really great too is whether you plan on holding the company forever or you plan on doing a transaction at some point, the path is actually the same. Because who wants to hold a crappy company for the rest of their life?
Correct.
And who wants to try to sell a crappy company and get a lower multiple and value for it? So building, I think the theme of this podcast that we take away is there is total alignment now for you personally, for what the industry is looking for all the players that are coming together, that we're all maturing into the fact of let's just build great companies. What are the principles underlying that? Do those things, you'll get the highest multiple. Or you might sit back and say, man, now that I built this great, it's running good. I just kind of want his lifestyle right now. It's self-managing, et cetera, which really simplifies, I think, some of the complexity of like, should I do this or should I do that? Should I take this short-term approach or should it's all now merged into just take a long-term great approach to building a business.
So somebody said it, and I forget who, but so I can't attribute it to anybody, but they said, you want to build a really good business that other people want to buy because you never know what the future holds and you may not be able to sell it. And I think there's a lot of folks that figured that out over the past 2 years. Like they were building something with the goal of selling it in 24. Well, guess what? The market didn't want it in 24.
Yeah.
And so if you're building it to kind of max out and peak in 24, now you're holding something that's not optimal and it's probably a drain on your energy and your resources and your life, as opposed to building something that somebody else wanted to buy because it's a solid company and now you're stuck with it and that's not a problem.
Yeah, I love
That's
that.
true across the board. I mean, you've got entrepreneurs who realize that you have private equity firms that are doing that. That's what I think a lot of the media and the regulators don't realize, but it's a good thing. These continuation vehicles are basically big private equity firms saying, wait a minute, we built a really good asset. Why are we trying to sell it? Let's
Right.
hold it. Right. And
We have to sell it because of the terms of our prior fund and when we have to give back capital, but we still want to be part of it, and so we got to close out that fund. We'll do a new fund and carry it on. Market's not realizing the true value of it today because of broader market issues and interest rates. So let's just hold it, continue to build it, continue to grow it.
Yeah, good business is
Cash
good
flow.
business. Period.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This has been awesome. I think very educational. You've simplified down, I think, the core principles that go into these transactions, make them very usable for an operator. Anything kind of in closing that you want to make sure people understand? Of course, I'd love for you, if people want to talk to you ahead of time and say, hey, I do want to understand what the 7 components of compliance are and what do I need to do? Because those are great roadmaps to bring to your DEO coach or for you personally to be like, okay, I've got a checklist now of how to build a great business.
Yeah, I'll say, I think I'd like to leave folks with the following. There are folks that have done exactly what you were trying to do, maybe not in the exact same way. And I think figuring out through the coaching, or through hiring folks as consultants, or just learning at conferences. I mean, we go to all the conferences. Our firm has been in the DSO space for 30 years. And when we joined with Holland Knight, we got a bunch of resources that we didn't have previously. We have a fantastic woman, Sandy Heller, down in our West Palm Beach office that used to play for the payers and deny claims, and she has switched teams and she is now playing for the good guys, and she's gotten some fantastic results for a bunch of our clients and chasing payers down to pay money that they're either slow walking or just denying in general. Go with people that have been there before, and have seen it before, and I think in doing so you get just the real value. And also, don't be afraid to reach out. David and I can't tell you how many hours a day are spent on phone calls that we don't bill for, because we firmly believe that, first of all, it's the right thing to do. Like, if you're calling me up to ask some questions about whatever, and I've got it, I don't have to research it. It's a half-hour phone call that helps you. Like, that's the right thing to do. Second of all, it's investing in the industry writ large. We want to see success here. We think a rising tide lifts all boats. And third, we want to build relationships and get to know folks and make sure that they're successful. So don't be afraid to reach out to people. Have the conversation up front, about kind of cost of time and that sort of thing. But if you give me a call and you say, hey, listen, I want to talk about a future sale process and what that can look like, I'd say, great, let's chat. And I'm not going to charge you for that, but I think that's very important information. So I want to leave that with folks, is like, go with the people that have done it before, and hopefully are a little bit giving of their time and expertise, because folks have given it to them.
Awesome.
I'll add to that. Entrepreneurs are a certain type of breed, and that usually means that they aren't just focused on one thing. They see bigger pictures. They see how things interplay. If you ever read the book Range, it talks about the power of that. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in dental who also are interested in things like med spas and infusion, and pick your sort of trendy topic of the week. And we do all those deals. But one of the things I always tell people who are first dipping their toe in healthcare or healthcare services is, you've got a much better ecosystem in dental, because I don't know what the DEO equivalent really is in a lot of these other spaces. And the ability to really test out a lot of your theses that maybe you can deploy in other kind of specialties with different caveats, you're really going to learn a lot by focusing on dental to start with. And there's just a lot of resources and capabilities you can deploy, including from DEO and the conferences, where you can really learn how to do it and then kind of replay it and scale it in other ways, and take a lot of lessons learned from other specialty practices, other healthcare ecosystems, everything from technology to products. And so, but there really is a benefit to focusing on an area that's got some maturity and has a lot of resources right there and available to provide that kind of coaching for a thesis that you want to deploy.
Yeah,
Awesome. All right, if somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to get a hold of one or both of you and just say, I'd love to just chat?
LinkedIn and email are great.
Yeah. Yep. David Marks, the real David Marks, and Eric Scalzo. The Holland Knight website as well. If you plug in DSO, we'll come up. Our emails and our profiles are there. Yeah, give us a call, reach out with email. Would love to chat.
Awesome. Thank you both for being on today. For those who, want to dig deeper, feel free to reach out to DEO as well at deodentalgroup.com. We have a event coming up here June 12th through the 14th out in Arizona. And so hopefully see you all there. It's a great place to network with 400 other dental entrepreneurs and really talk through some of these issues. And until next time, keep smiling.